Thank you for taking the time to chat. I appreciate it. I love the fact that you weren't briefed, and I only got a few notes. I was actually doing a quick search online just before this, and I loved your LinkedIn, and I absolutely love the Twitter the Twitter bio. So clearly, you've been asked many times before about your stuff and your history and your background. I want to share a bit about me and what mine is, and we'll just vibe, as they say.
Sure.
Um, do you want me to start with me? Not because I'm more important, but because you've already been asked the same questions a million times.
Well, I did a little research too, so I guess what you went to Harvard, huh?
I did an online course. That was actually a super lucky thing. Um, I worked at BlackBerry for about 4 years. I was with a startup in Toronto called Vigo that Research and Motion acquired. Went over to BlackBerry, worked on a news enterprise product, which then led me to the podcast product, which led me to the basically be to run the music service on the BlackBerry app or the BlackBerry store. So I basically had a budget, started, ran, and then shut down the BlackBerry equivalent of iTunes. Did several million dollars of digital download sales across 17 countries around the world. Worked with the labels, good stuff. While I was there, I came across, I think it was Mashable. I came across like an article on their site where they said, Harvard EDX program, we're trialing it, reaching out to the world, apply now. I mean, not a lot of people got in. I managed to get in, and it was super cool. We did copyright policy and law. It was a 3-month program. It was intensive and online. They were trialing that software while also teaching us. And at the end of it, we got a little certificate. It was a lot of fun.
Cool.
So my background is actually I did not start in law. You're much more well versed in that. I was a bit of a nerd and athlete, and I played kind of semi-pro baseball in Europe. I played on the Czech junior national baseball team. I played in the World Junior Series in Moncton, New Brunswick, and I think '98. I went to the U.S. On a partial scholarship. But eventually I quit baseball after that first year, came back to Toronto. And in university, my passion for music, my geekiness for technology, and then my focus on just weird things kind of converged with computers and web design. And I started my first website, and 20 plus years later, I'm still running V13 Media. But I actually was born into music in some senses. My grandfather was instrumental in founding SOCAN. So he worked at ProCan and was instrumental in helping to merge. I think it was I have the notes and I'm so bad for not remembering the history, but I think it was ASCAP or not ASCAP, it was ProCan and BMI, a couple of the different rights societies in Canada, and he merged them. And then eventually wound up as leading as running SOCAN for a year or two before he retired. And I think he still has an award, like it's like a Jan V. Matichek Classical Music Award or something that they hand out. My mom, she ended up in music as well and was the, I believe, general manager of CBC Records before that went under.
Ah,
But in the mid 90s, my family moved to Europe, where we're originally from. So I didn't speak with my grandparents as much. My mom left CBC and she started working for a couple labels there. Uh, and long story short, like music was in me. I grew up listening to it. I could not listen to music. I loved it, and I wanted to do things on my own. I didn't want to rely on the laurels of others, or sorry, rest of my laurels rely on coattails. Yeah, one thing led to another, and that was it. Just started a website and had a career at the same time, kind of the two running in tandem.
yeah.
And then about 3 years ago is when I took my final entrepreneurial plunge into all things V13 Media full time.
Gotcha.
So I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been running the site for 20 years. I, have had a lot of other day jobs that I didn't love, but ultimately led me to doing this full time. And I think how I got to the podcast was I used to do a ton of interviews. earlier on and tried different things, and between two ferns, comedic stuff, and I've talked to a lot of different people. And then we started an artist development agency 2.5 years ago, which has been going pretty well so far. It's a lot of fun. And in learning about marketing and sales and having done that for so long, I realized, listen, if I'm the face of the company and I'm the one helping these artists, the best way to do this is just to start having dialogues with people within the industry. Uh, and so that's why the podcast is happening.
Gotcha.
It's new. It's like nothing groundbreaking, but I think it's something important. And one of my former writers, who's still a colleague, Andrew King, he used to run Canadian Musician Magazine, and when that site went down, there was like a bit of a void in the market. And so I'm trying to help also fill that gap through the existing site that we have.
Yeah.
But what's funny is coming back to you and your your Twitter handle, trying to be honest in a dishonest business. Talk
Oh,
to me about that.
I'm gonna look at that for a second because
I love that line though. It's very apt.
um yeah, I mean, I guess the key in a way for me is that unlike most people who have the kind of job that I have, I didn't come from the music business. I mean, sorry, I'm just looking at my Twitter handle. Oh right, okay. Um, yeah, I didn't come from the music business. Like, I think a typical story is where a person, tries to be a musician, and as I'm sure you know, for every 100 people who try to become musicians, for a career, um, you know, maybe one out of, oh, I think I inadvertently hit the Google Meet again. One out of I don't know how many make it. Probably 99.5% of people who try fail. And by fail, I
Yeah.
just mean in the sense that, aren't able to make a living off of being, a musician. And I think for a lot of those people, if it doesn't work out, then it's like, oh man, like didn't work out for me as a singer. I'm going to go back to law school, or I'm going to go back to school and become a entertainment lawyer, or I'm going to go start a record label, or I'm going to go start a management company. That wasn't me. I was a criminal lawyer and a poverty lawyer and a refugee lawyer. I didn't even take copyright in law school. I certainly didn't see it as part of my own trajectory. I had a little bit of interest in it. I've always been a huge fan. I was in a band in law school just for fun. Never had serious aspirations, but I just thought, maybe. But honestly, I even went to I remember I went to a meeting. I went to Osgoode Hall in Toronto Law School, and I went to a
Yeah.
meeting. They had a meeting, like people interested in, putting together an entertainment law class. And I remember going to that meeting and kind of looking around the room, and it looked like just a bunch of jerk offs. And I was just like, I'm just going to stick with what I was doing. And, part of the reason I was doing criminal law and poverty law is, I have unfortunately a bit of a history as a substance abuser and a juvenile delinquent. I have a criminal record. It was not easy for me to become a lawyer. But that's why I sort of had an interest, I think, in that type of law, because I think there was a small part of me that kind of thought, geez, if I had had somebody who gave more of a shit about me when I was getting into trouble, maybe I wouldn't have gotten into trouble, or maybe I wouldn't have gotten into so much trouble. So I sort of had that in the back of my mind, and the entertainment thing was a complete fluke. I moved into an apartment building in the early '90s. Can't remember what year, maybe '93. And my next door neighbors were in a band who were signed to Network, and I just became very close with them as friends. Nothing to do with work. And I'd come home from court, and they'd be like, "Oh, come on over and let's smoke a joint and tell us about your case," or whatever. And I'd go to parties and meet a lot of musicians, and because they were on Network, that was really, I think, when Network was at its it was really coming into its peak. Sarah McLachlan, Grapes of Wrath, Skinny Puppy, others I can't remember. So I met a lot of those people, and I guess artists liked me. They thought I spoke a similar language, and I'd be at these parties, and I'd have these musicians saying to me like, "Hey man, you don't look like a lawyer, man. That's cool. I got this contract. Is there any way you could?" And I'd always be like, "Dude, I can't help you. I don't know anything about that stuff. Here's my card. If you get busted for drunk driving or drugs or assault, give me a call." But the more people asked, the more I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't God's way of telling me maybe there's something else I might be able to do with my life. And to go back to your question, I think because I didn't come from the music business, I didn't acquire a lot of the habits that go with the music business, which I have found to be a business that is full of people who are either so scared of being honest because they don't want to say the wrong thing to the wrong person, or just full of shitty, duplicitous people who wouldn't know the truth if it kicked them in the fucking teeth. So I don't think I'm right more than other people. I just think I'm honest. Doesn't make me right. It just makes me honest. But even that in this business, I guess sets me apart in some ways because it's really important to me to be honest about everything in my life. And why would that be any different in my job? I've met so many people who are so full of shit in the music business. I just never want to be one of those people. I vowed never to become one of those people. And so even with something like, because I do so many different things, like I'm still Nickelback's lawyer 30, good God, 32 years later. I'm still Nickelback's lawyer. And I'll tell you a story, which on some level is just a stupid story, but kind of says a lot, I suppose. Nickelback played the Grey Cup halftime show in Vancouver. God, that's got to be 12, 13 years ago. Stephen Harper was premier because we went to dinner with him. So how long, or prime minister? How long ago was that? I mean, it's a long time ago. And the Nickelback guys invited me and my family down for the sound check. Thought, oh, it'd be fun, kids can run around on the football field. My kids were really little then. So, we went down and Nickelback sound checking, and there's that giant screen in BC Place. And at one point, Chad Kruger's then girlfriend came running over to me and said, "Hey, check out Chad." And I'm looking at the screen. I'm like, "Yes, what? Like, what about him?" She said, "Well, what do you think of his hair?" I said, "Of his hair? Why are you asking me what I think of his hair?" And she said, "Oh, well, he wanted me to ask you." And I said, "Oh." And I looked, I said, "Yeah, it's pretty good. I think that's a pretty good look." I said, "But why does he care? Why is he asking me what I think about his hair?" And she said, "Well, he told me you're the only person who's going to be honest about it." So, big deal, small story, kind of goofy. But I don't think I'd still be with Nickelback 32 years later if I had just been a yes man and had just, told them everything they do is great. It's just not my nature. And I don't think I'm doing anybody a service by just telling them what they want to hear. But it is a business where people feel they have to tell other people what they want to hear. And so I suppose on some level it does set me apart a little bit. And I hear that a lot from people, and it means a lot when they say that. We can count on you to be honest. We can count on you to get an honest opinion. Like I say, it doesn't mean I'm right, but it just means I'm honest.
I appreciate that. It's funny because you share that anecdote at the very beginning about having troubles with drugs or substances when you were younger. That is that honesty. I We have values. We call them the 13 V's with our company, V13 Media, and one of them is authenticity. And I stress that to all the artists we talk to, whether they're like unknown or developing or bigger. I say, like, if you're not making your art for art's sake, then you're already missing the boat. Like, you can't be creating to achieve something. That comes secondary to the art. So focus on who you are, show up authentically. And the irony is that when you do that, it's organic, it's natural, and that'll resonate more with a wider audience than if it's contrived.
I agree, and I say that a lot to artists as well. That I still believe the primary thing that sells art is honesty, and that the public knows that and reacts to that, and that honesty resonates. And that can mean a lot of different things. I
Mhm.
mean, if Nickelback are singing about getting drunk and partying, you know what? That might be because Chad's talking about getting drunk and partying.
Yeah.
He's not pretending, and he's not doesn't do that all the time. But I mean, you know, um, I do believe that honesty is the most crucial element in any art.
So what you're saying is there are kind, genuine, truthful people in this industry still.
Well, there's artists and there's the people around artists, and those are very different animals. I think there's lots of artists who are very honest in their art, and then I think there are lots of people around them who are full of shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Show if you're in the business or any business for the reasons, the right reasons, which is you genuinely find it interesting, you genuinely are passionate about it. I think that's good. Anyone that's in any industry, music included, because they want to go to the parties, they want to be associated with something um, by proxy. That for me is not authentic. Why I do this? Because I can't not. I wake up every day and all I think about is music and how I can help and what I can do. And I think that's why people like Natasha are like, yeah, sure, we'll set up an interview because um, we've got that history, we've got that rapport. They know that I'm not going to muck something up.
Yep.
I'll share an anecdote for you because I got a few and I got more questions for you, obviously. Um, I developed a really good friendship with a guy in Toronto, Dean Pogue. He works at Warner Music now. I met him when he was still at Roadrunner before Warner took over Roadrunner. Such a nice guy. He gave me hope that there was authenticity, authentic people and kindness within the industry. And I remember one day chatting with him, and I was like, "Oh my God, you got the best stories, and I can't believe you did this, and you were with the band. I'm so jealous because that's what I love to do. I can't wait till I'm in the industry." And he just stopped dead, blank, looked at me and said, "Dude, you are in the industry. What are you talking about? You're doing this. It's not the same as me, but you're doing it." And it's so funny because there was such a simple thing, and yet I hadn't really come to that conclusion yet. That was probably about 10 years ago now, but I'll never forget that. And from that day forward, I was like, oh yeah, fuck it. I'm just gonna continue doing what I do and it'll come to me at the time that it's supposed to, right?
Yep.
Um, so tell me quickly, how did you get from like, troubled youth partying, doing whatever to criminal and refugee law?
Um. So I've always been lucky that school stuff comes easy to me. I don't know why. It's just my brain. I always found school easy, and I never really had to struggle the way a lot of people do. And that's one of the reasons I think I was able to get into trouble a lot is because, on the one hand, I was a very, very troubled young person. On the other hand, I was usually top of my class in terms of marks. And so, I grew up at a time when I think if you were doing well in school, from the outside, it looked like everything was great. And so people didn't feel the need to intervene because, hey, he's getting good marks. Everything must be great, which indeed it wasn't. So, in a way, getting into trouble was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm kind of one of those classic scared straight stories where it only took once getting in trouble as an adult for me to go, all right, I don't think this is the life I want to pursue. Part of what happened when I got into trouble is I had court ordered psychiatric assessment and care. And I was very lucky. I got hooked up with a psychiatrist named Tony Marcus. And he was a bit of a celebrity, I suppose, because he had been the psychiatrist who testified in the Clifford Robert Olson case, which may not mean anything if you're not from BC, but he was a serial killer who killed a bunch of young children. I think raped them. I could be wrong about the rape part, but it was horrible regardless. Just a horrible, that really freaked out British Columbia. I mean, I was a kid when this all happened, but I remember it because he was like the bogeyman. Like he was the scary guy, and the kind of guy you'd think about when the lights went off in your bedroom. But same guy, and I'll never forget what he said to me the first day I had my first session with him. He's looking at my record, and just sort of whatever had been written about me. And then he kind of looks at me. He says, "I have a prediction." I said, "Okay." He said, "6 months from today, you're either going to be at the beginning of a whole new life that's going to lead to a lot of success, or you're going to be dead. Because you're now going to have to make some serious decisions about your life. You've been able to just kind of skate through it so far. That's over now. You now need to decide who do you want to be as an adult." And that really impacted me. And I really threw myself into my schoolwork. I was at UBC then, at University of British Columbia, and I was just taking like general arts courses, but I was so interested in trying to figure out myself, who I was, what made me tick, that I really dug into those courses in ways that probably most people who went to university first year weren't even thinking about. I really wanted to understand my own motivations and who I was and how did I get into all that trouble and how did I get into all those drugs. And I was quite a loner those first couple of years at UBC. UBC's got this beautiful, I don't know if it's still there, I think it is, main library, which is the original library. And it's this old building, probably built around the turn of the century. And it had like 3 or 4 basements. And I used to grab my work, grab a bunch of books, and hide out in that basement and read. I read so much over about a 3 year period. And I really, a lot of people that are in university at the beginning, they're really just there either because they want to get into a different school, law school, doctor, medical school. I really didn't have an agenda. I just wanted to not, you know, kill myself, either with drugs or some other way. I wanted to try and figure out, like I say, what had gone so wrong with me. And it was really a great period for me because I just sort of had to rebuild myself as a human. And in a lot of ways, I look at my life as pre getting into trouble and post getting into trouble. And, I was definitely a case of arrested development because I started so much of my development, things that other people were doing naturally in high school, didn't start for me until long after. Like, so for example, I didn't have a girlfriend until law school. All my buddies were, had girlfriends and were having sex and whatever in high school. I just couldn't, it was just about drugs for me and about the insanity of my existence. There was no room for anything to do with that. And, so things like that. I mean, so at a certain point in time, I really had to start thinking about what I wanted to do with as a career. And it was like maybe third year UBC. And I had a buddy who I have to give a shout out to, Chris Goldrick, who I think is still on the air on CBC TV in Ottawa. He became a journalist. But he sort of said to me, "Hey man, I'm writing the LSAT, the law school admission exam, next week. You should write it." And I said, "Why? I don't want to be a lawyer." He said, "Oh man, you're so smart. Like, I bet you could just walk in and without studying and you probably do well. And who knows, maybe that gives you a few options." So I'm like, you know what? Okay. So I went in, I didn't study, not even 1 second, and I aced it. Like I did well. And I suddenly went, okay, isn't that interesting? Like, maybe there are some other options for me in terms of what I want to do with my life. But the real driving motivation at that time was, I think, fear of mostly of relapsing. I was still around a lot of my friends who I did drugs with, and I was still that city. Vancouver is so drugged out. There's so much drugs everywhere, and I didn't relapse, but I was scared I was going to. And so I applied to a bunch of law schools, and I got in everywhere. And I decided to go to Osgood. The first day of school, they kind of went around the class at Osgood and sort of asked everybody why they were in law school. Why did you come to law school? And some people, a handful of people, maybe were like, well, I believe in social justice and I believe in or I don't know. The charter was still a relatively new thing at that time. Some people were interested in that. Some people were like, well, I had a poli sci degree and I really didn't know what to do with it, so I thought I'd come to law school. And when it came to me, I said, I was scared I was going to relapse, and I needed to get out of Vancouver, and this was the surest way to get somebody else to pay for it. Because when you come from I don't come from wealth at all, but I come from a Jewish family. But despite stereotypes to the contrary, not all Jewish people are rich, and we certainly weren't. And but when you're Jewish and you get into the best law school in Canada, your extended family finds a way to make it happen for you, and that's kind of the truth. I really just kind of wanted to get away from Vancouver. It wasn't so much a desire to get into law school. It was more a desire to get away from something than to get to something. And once I was in law school, that just seemed like a natural thing because I had had some experience with the criminal justice system. I had empathy towards that, towards people who had been in trouble with the law. And so it just seemed natural. I also fell in love. I had a professor who I loved. He died fairly recently, Harvey Mandel, and I found him fascinating. So I would say it was partly my own biography that led me to those areas of the law, but also a specific professor who I thought the things he said were profound, and it really deepened my interest in especially criminal law. So it just made sense to me. It seemed like a natural path, and that's what I did.
That's amazing. It sounds like that authenticity and that truth, who you are, how you conduct yourself, has been there all along. I commend that.
I think that's
You
true. I
got
mean, even in elementary school, because I get that a lot from people. Why are you so polarizing? Why are you so polarizing in the music business? And like, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like I'm polarizing. The people around me, I don't. They might think I'm weird because I'm kind of weird, but I don't think they. But yeah, I've always had that effect. I don't know why. Even in elementary school, I was one of those people who people either loved me or hated me, and it's kind of been that way to this day.
nothing wrong with that. I think some people are scared of truth. Some people are scared of authentic because they don't know how to, react or handle it. You said you got my mind running, and it's funny how we oftentimes do things or go certain ways because of what we did. I was a ball player for a long time, and because of that, when I got to university, I was like, "Oh my God, freedom!" And it was like sex and weed and beer and sex and weed and beer. But that led me to be like, "Oh my God, I feel like I wasted so many years doing nothing. I gotta now work really hard," which started my career. And then I turned 40, pandemic happened, and I started to have this. I don't know who these companies are that are working for. It doesn't feel authentic. Like I want to do more of this. I want to work for myself. And that's when my life coach at the time, Barb, said, "Well, you're not happy and you're not finding out of the work because you're not supposed to do this. What are you supposed to do?" And that for me was the big wake up call 4-ish years ago where I said, "Oh, what is it that I enjoy doing and I don't consider it work?" And so here we are, having that conversation. It's also funny how things happen full circle. So I was at your studios on Friday with my girlfriend. We had a date night. I went to the comedy show.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was super fun. I
Are you in
appreciated it.
I thought you were in Toronto. Are you in Vancouver?
time in Vancouver.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay. My bad. Yeah, no, we had a CD release party. I go to every single comedy show. I literally think that's the only one I have ever missed because we had one of our artists had a CD release party out in White Rock, so I was out in White Rock that night.
it's the it. It's meant to be. I'm reading a book now called The Surrender Experiment, and I really genuinely believe that things happen as they should. Um, Anyways, the point is, I went to the bathroom and I saw a Theory of a Dead Man poster on the wall.
Ah,
I've covered those guys for years now because obviously they were on Roadrunner for a while, um, or at least there was some kind of affiliation with Roadrunner 604. I don't remember,
we signed,
but I know.
so Chad and I, that was the first band we signed, was Theory of a Dead Man. So Chad and I signed them in 2001. And
Mhm.
then when we did our deal with Roadrunner, Roadrunner loved the band, so we basically licensed it outside of Canada and then own it full off in Canada.
Amazing. See, you're going to give me the facts. I just have the stories. You give me the facts. You're the lawyer. But so check this. I started V13, what was Pure Grain Audio 20 years ago in university. And I happened to chat with a buddy in Brooklyn who I went to high school with in Prague.
Ah,
Turns out that G is now still 20 years later, but then I got a job. I'm working for Indigoot in Brooklyn or in Manhattan. I'm working for Indigoot. What
Theory's
cool. What's in
management company.
exactly. And so he's like, I'll send you a box. What's in the box? Theory of a Dead Man, Shine Down, like a Hailstorm, all these, well, maybe not Hailstorm them, but all these bands.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow, I can get free swag, like signed drum heads running a website. So I messaged him from the show. I took a photo of the poster saying, oh my God, it's the Indicoot poster. This like takes us back 15 plus years. That for me is the reason I'm doing this because I love the stories. I love the connections. I love the vibration between the people that are doing this for the same love and passion.
Hmm.
So it's just one of my anecdotes that I share. I got a couple more which I'll share, but I don't want to talk about me too
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
Uh, Going back to you, so me, you could look it up. You've worked with so many different bands, a lot of Canadian icons. Um, is there like one that you were the most surprised by? Like, I want to work with these guys. I didn't think the success would be as big as it was. Or was there one that was the opposite, where maybe you thought like these guys are going to be huge and it didn't pan out as well? Or maybe a favorite band, or give me some from an artistic, from a sorry, music lover's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely examples of all of those things you just said. So, you know, in terms of maybe a band that I really thought would do better than they did, I'd probably to this day still say Armchair Cynics, who were a band I signed from Victoria early in the label's history. And I just thought they had it all. Singer was good looking. The songs were great. And, and it started strong. We had a single that did well. And it just didn't work out. And, it's funny. We did a bit of a spring cleaning around here. I don't know, 10 months ago, and we sort of closed up for a couple of days, and the staff and I just because after 22 years, man, you got boxes of stuff and hard drives and we found a bunch of awesome stuff. And one thing that we found was an album's worth of Armchair Cynics. I wasn't sure when I heard it because they sounded so good. I was like, are these actual masters or just demos or what am I even listening to? So I got a hold of the band, and it turns out they were demos for an album they never made, but they're so good, and it coincides with the fact that it's the 20th anniversary this year of their first record with us. And
Mhm.
so we're putting it all out. We're going to put out the demos. We found some unreleased a couple of outtakes from that 20th anniversary record. And they came to Vancouver. We did a couple of podcasts. We recorded we recorded some live performance stuff in our soundstage. the place
Cool.
where you saw the comedy show, and I'm excited. I'm really excited to be able to put that out now. I'm a bit of a pit bull. I don't take no for an answer very well. And once I bite down on something, it's hard for me to let go. And I'm not fooling myself. The guys are now in their late 40s. They have kids, they have jobs. But you know what? I'm going to go to radio with this stuff. I'm going to put it out and go hard, just because I think it deserves it. I also have very recently started a new imprint called Decades, which is just me sort of focusing on bands, mostly that I worked with as a lawyer before 604 even existed. That's become strangely important to me as I guess as I get old. I'm sort of looking backwards as much as I'm looking forwards.
Mhm.
And I just was like, you know what? There's all these great bands I worked with as a lawyer who I really feel deserved better than they got. And I think now's the time. I got scared that a lot of these bands were just going to disappear into the sands of time, as well as the fact that I don't think that period of Vancouver is very well documented. If you're in Toronto, everybody talks about, oh, the Queen Street music scene in the 80s and, all that stuff. Vancouver doesn't seem to have that kind of self-referential kind of sort of milestones, or talking points, which I always thought was strange. So the Decades Project is as much about me wanting to shine a light on generally the Vancouver music scene as it is about specific bands. So I love that. In terms of bands that did better than I thought maybe they would, I mean, I don't think I was anticipating Call Me Maybe to do what Call Me Maybe did. I mean,
Mhm.
that is, if it's not the biggest selling single in history, it's top five. It's been the biggest selling single at times. I'm not sure if other things
Yeah.
have overtaken it. It's the most performed song in SoCan history. That's what that award is. And I knew it was a good song, geez, but did I think it was going to be life altering? No. So that was an absolute shock. Still is. I don't think a single day goes by 12, 13 years later where there isn't some sort of use on the song, some kind of, there's always something on that song.
Mhm.
I mean, Nickelback, did I think that was going to happen? I mean, same thing. I knew they were good. I knew I liked them. But, that doesn't mean anybody else is going to. And certainly with Nickelback for the first 3 or 4 years or 5 years even, I seem to be the only person in the industry who gave a shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to rephrase that. Ralph James was a very early believer as well. He's still their agent all these years later. But I was the first guy in there. I was sort of, they came to see me as a lawyer. And right away, I remember walking into my wife's a lawyer as well. She works with me. I remember taking the CD into her office and kind of saying, because, they gave me like a burned CD, like, which I still have. I'll sell it on eBay one day for hopefully a lot of money. But, I kind of walked into my wife's office and said, man, I sure hope I like the music because there's something about that guy. It was definitely Chad who kind of, it's just like something about him. I can't even put my finger on it, but because he's just one of those people who walks into a room and everybody just is sort of drawn to him.
Mhm.
So, I mean, did I think they were going to do well? Yes. Did I think they'd become the 11th biggest selling musical act in history? No, I didn't. But I've had lots of wonderful things like that. I mean, Marianas Trench. I mean, I often call them like sort of the sort of most representative band there is on 604 because
Interesting.
so much of what we learned, well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, I have quirkier tastes. I like a lot of different things. I like mainstream stuff, but I love quirkier stuff. And they're a quirky band. I mean, they're super. I mean, Foo Fighters meets Beach Boys. That's you know, and but it wasn't just that. It was the fact that we were very confident they would do well at radio, and they didn't. And so we really had to come up with a plan B quickly. And that's where we really start to focus on social media and YouTube. And this is in the early days of social media. I don't even think there was anything except MySpace. But we really used MySpace to break that band, as well as videos. And so, in a lot of ways, they set the template for all the releases after that, in the sense that never again did we just kind of do the typical thing. Because when I was first in the business, everybody did the exact same thing. You made a full album, you picked a single, you made a usually expensive video, you threw it out there, you crossed your fingers. It didn't work. Next. I mean, that was kind of the process. Whereas with Marianas, we employed such a different approach that was a lot about like asking questions. Who's the audience? Um, what have we done so far that has reacted in a way? What has worked so far? What hasn't worked so far? And now, ever since then, and that's 15 years ago, 20 years ago, ever since then, we never take the same approach. We any cookie cutter approach we had went out the window that day. And instead, whenever we sign a new band to this day, we sort of employ the same method of questioning. Who's the audience? Who do we think the audience is? How's the best way to reach that audience? What are the tools that we can use to get the music from here to the ears of those people we think are the audience? So that really, that first Marianas album really changed the way that this label did business.
That's awesome. That first album is also, I mean, it's really good for most people that don't know Mariana's Trench. That first album is very rock, and then they start to get poppier as time went on. Um, so I can appreciate the story. Again, I've been in this industry for a while, so I'm just going to share. I was in Toronto. That's where I lived for the majority of my life. That's where I met my ex, and we eventually moved out here. We moved out here kind of like early, was it mid 2020
Mhm.
or 2021? Sorry, just after pandemic really, I guess, got going. Um, I remember the first time we came out to visit. My ex casually says, "We're going to a wedding. You know, we're going to do this big tour. I've never been to Vancouver, I've never been to BC. Sorry, it's beautiful. We're going to go all over the place, Nelson and Kamloops and everywhere."
Yep.
So we started by flying into Kelowna, and that first day we went to Ian's wedding. And I'm like, "Who's this guy, Ian?" He's like, "Oh, it was my roommate for like 8, 9 years. You know, we were best buds.
Ian
What does he
Castleman.
do?" Yep.
I was at that wedding.
No way,
Yeah, I
seriously?
was at a winery in Kelowna.
Yeah, it's fun. That's so funny. So see, we've already crossed paths and we didn't even realize it.
Funny.
Um, but those guys are awesome. I remember listening to that first record on vinyl at Ian's house, and I was like, Jesus, this is good. Like, why aren't you playing this stuff more? Not to say that their new stuff isn't good either, but I really enjoyed that first album.
Yeah, and I mean, we sort of hit a funny thing with it because, I had said earlier we were very sure of ourselves when it came to them. We really thought that was going to do well radio, but the rock stations thought it was too pop, and the pop stations thought it was too rock, and we sort of got caught in the middle, and that's when we came up with these new strategies to kind of you know um, help them succeed, and Josh made a very conscious decision after that first album that he wanted to go more pop. I think
Mhm.
he didn't never want to be again in that situation where he was being rejected by both pop and rock formats. So he really made a decision. I'm a pop writer. That's what I want to be. He wrote "Cross My Heart," and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, great band. I'm happy that they're still continuing to succeed. And it's funny to hear that, that they're kind of what you think is representative of the label overall. Um, 604 Records, Simkin Artist Management, comedy here often. Now I found out that there's a podcast network. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. Two-part question. A is, how the hell do you have time for it all? And B, being a family man myself as well, how do you balance family with all of that?
So yeah, great questions. I think. somewhere along the way, I substituted work for drugs, and like for
Mm,
example, I'm in my office till extraordinarily late hours every single night. Like when we're done this podcast, it's 5 o'clock in Vancouver. I'll go home. I'm gonna hang out with my kids. Probably watch a couple of periods of hockey with my kids. I think my wife's in choir tonight, but I mean, if it wasn't for that, I would have hung out with her as well.
mhm.
But then I come back for the late shift here, and that's really when things happen. Like during the day, I'm dealing with emergencies. I'm dealing with things I can do quickly. I'm dealing with my staff. I'm making phone calls. Night's a whole different story. At night, I come back here, I change into my pajamas, and I'm not kidding. I put on my slippers, I roll a couple of joints, I make a big pot of tea, and that's when I laser focus. I am usually here till about 4 a.m. every single night. Now, I'm lucky. I live at that time of night, if I drive home, 6 minutes. So that's number one. Number two, my wife was in the business. She still is a little bit, but so she understands it. And we've been together so I don't know, 30 some odd years. I mean, she knows what I'm like. I'm not a lot of fun. I mean, I'm just not. Like, I'm not a party guy. I don't like going out very much. I'm not very social. I'm either in my office, like I am this moment, or I'm at home. Not a lot of other stuff going, or at a Canucks game. That's it. Like, those are about my three main activities. Drives my wife crazy, but, I don't want to retire and travel. That's not me. I want to keep producing. I kind of feel like I live to be productive, and I'm driven. And I think I'm lucky that our office is so close to our house. That makes it much easier. And I know lawyers who don't see their kids at all
Mhm.
because they work till 8 or 9, and by the time they got home, the kids were already in bed. That was never me. Luckily, I always go home. At dinner time, I'm always home, hanging out there, and I've just done my best to do my best. And I think my wife's pretty understanding, in part because she was in the business, and in part because because I've done well, and I guess the financial, I mean, it helps.
Absolutely.
That part helps. So yeah, I'm lucky. I'm lucky I have an understanding wife. I'm lucky I have an understanding family. I'm lucky I've been able to structure my life that I can actually do all those things.
Hmm.
And you know, I work my ass off. I just utterly work my ass off every single day. And yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I what happens is that I'll be sitting in the office at 2 in the morning, and I'll think of some wacky idea, and I'll send an email to myself about it, and then the next day I'll look at it and go either, "Oh God, what a dumb idea," or I'll go, "God, that's a really good idea." So something like the comedy label. I wasn't looking to get into that, but we had a producer on the label who was producing a lot of comedy for outside sort of comedians. And I used to sit in the studio listening. I love comedy. I used to sit in the studio listening. And I remember asking him at one point, like, what do these comedians do with these records you're producing? And he's like, well, nothing really. I mean, well, I said, well, what do you mean nothing? He said, well, they'll make enough CDs for when they're touring. They'll submit it to Sirius XM and hope that the comedy station plays it. They'll put it on Spotify, but people don't really stream much comedy on Spotify. And it got my brain thinking. It just got my brain going. Like, geez, like I wonder if we actually came up with a strategy to really try and do something with these records. What if? And I flew out to Toronto, and I went and had to set up a meeting with the guys at Sirius XM. And I said,
Hmm.
listen, I'm thinking about starting a comedy label and really putting some investment into it. And like their jaws dropped. Like I guess most people weren't doing that kind of thing or thinking that way. And so I did, and I'm so glad I did because that has become a very lucrative part of our business. I was instrumental in getting the Juno back for comedy because that had the last time there was a Juno for comedy was the fucking SCTV, the hosers. What were they? Bob and Doug McKenzie. That was
Okay, yeah.
that was the last Juno for comedy. And so that tends to be the pattern. I have a stupid idea at 3 in the morning, usually when I'm stoned. I I write myself a memo about it, and then if it's a good idea, I actually put it into play, and then I'll be damned, it worked. Then I have to hire a bunch more people. That's why the company's so big, because me and my stupid ideas, and then they start to work, and then I'm like, well, shit, I'm gonna have to actually hire a staff. I mean, originally there was no staff for the comedy label. We didn't need one. Now I have one, two, three people who are full time on the comedy label, and maybe another two or three people who devote substantial time to it, even if it's not the only thing they do.
Mhm. I mean, that's not a bad thing. I heard recently that our purpose on this planet is to create, and that some people create more than others. And personally, I'm driven by it. And it sounds like that's one of your main goals or one main driving factors too. Whether or not that's replacing some kind of other substance, that's, who knows? Maybe it's the same for me. Maybe you and I are both just replacing something with work. But I also know that like the feeling of creating and trying to figure out the puzzle and then seeing it come together is just such an amazing rush. And then wanting to help. But I also think that, to your point about family, being present is really important. It sounds like that you know how to compartmentalize that part of your mind where when you're with them, everything is off. When you're with work, everything else is off. And that yields dividends in terms of your output, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that, at least for me, when I had kids, suddenly my motivations were somewhat different, especially since my oldest son has some special needs, and he's great. He's totally fine. But when he was born, he almost died, and it
Mhm.
was very touch and go. And all of a sudden, when I'm sitting in my office at 3 in the morning, questioning what the hell am I doing and why am I sitting in the office at 3 in the morning? In the old days, it had something to do with some vague sense of my own position, my own legacy. Whereas once you have kids, man, that goes out the window. I just don't care. I care about them. And when you have a special needs child, all of a sudden you're like, man, I want to make sure when I'm gone, I've left so much for him that
Mhm.
nothing can go wrong. So there's a bit of that sort of motivation as well with me. But I also just love what I do. And again, I'm not a very social person. I never have been. I mean, people who know me, I'm quite social with, and I'm good in small groups. But like, I hate, for example, music industry events. Don't like them. Not my idea of a good time. So I avoid that stuff. I'd much rather be sitting in my office thinking of some cool way to market a band than,
Yeah.
at some bullshit party, where everybody's sucking up to each other. And, I learned that lesson many, many, many years ago. There used to be a conference in Vancouver called Music West, kind of like what CMW was in Toronto. And
Right.
hasn't been around for a long time, but it was there for a long time. And I remember when I first got into the industry, I went to Music West. It was at the convention center in Vancouver. And you walk in and they make you put on one of those name tags. I'm Jonathan Simkin. And you're walking around this place, and you're looking at people's name tags, and they're looking at yours, and you get that look from people like, oh, he's nobody. Oh, he's nobody. Which I was nobody. I mean, I still feel like I'm nobody, but I was really nobody then. And I remember it was depressing. And at the end of the day, I was still a smoker then. I sat on the curb having a cigarette, kind of going, who am I? What am I doing? Like what am I doing? Like that felt so degrading and humiliating, and I just like ugh. And that was it. Well, fast forward maybe 2 years, and I've made a name for myself. I think Matthew Good had broken by then, and Nickelback was starting to break. A few things had broken for me. And all of a sudden, I'm not only am I there, I'm on a panel. They've asked me to speak on a panel, and I'm walking around with a name tag just like 2 years earlier. But this time, people are looking at me and going, "Oh, that's the Nickelback guy," or "Oh, that's the Matthew Good Band guy." Funny enough, at the end of that conference, I sat on the same curb, once again smoking a cigarette, going, "Who the hell am I?"
Mm.
The fact that I had some notoriety at that point didn't help. Um, and I learned a very important lesson that day. And maybe this goes back to the very first question you asked me about honesty and my little thing in my Twitter handle. Um, I realized something, which was I don't like either side of the dick suck equation in the music business. I don't want to be the suckor. I don't want to be the sucky. I don't like either of those.
Mm.
This business is so messed up in so many ways, and I think a lot of the reasons are people's weird motivations for doing it in the first place. And that side of it has never appealed to me at all. I don't want people. I mean, look, I have an ego like everybody, and when I get written about, or I just had my first Billboard article published. I mean, yeah, that was exciting. I liked it, and does it give you a bit of an ego, boost? Of course it does. But that doesn't mean it's what drives me, and that doesn't mean it's what I think it's all about, because I don't think that. But I think for a lot of people in this business, that's exactly what it's about. Self glorification, which I'm very self deprecating, which you would also know if you follow me on Twitter. I don't think that because I've had some hit records, that gives me a right to be a jerk. And I'm amazed constantly at certain rules that people don't follow in the music business. Simple example, people don't respond to emails. I guess if they don't think you're important enough, they don't respond. I've never understood.
Yeah.
When I get I respond to, and one reason I'm here so late every night is I get about 400 emails a day, and I respond to every single one, even if it's just to say, hey, I'm really busy, give me a week or two and I'll come back to you. I think it's important to respond to people. I think it's polite, and I think manners are important. And I've never understood why in the music business people think it's okay not to respond, or if some artist sends you some music, that it's okay not to respond to that. Like, even if I don't like something, I'll come back with some hopefully constructive criticism. And
Mhm.
I just think, like, if I get to a point in my life or in my job where I can't do the simple courtesy of responding to somebody's email, something's pretty wrong with that scenario.
Yep. I'm with you. I think there's a lot of similarities between us. I happened to check my sent box like a month or two ago, just out of curiosity. The history of the website, and it's at about 250,000 emails because I too like to respond to emails. There was a lesson I learned from one of my bosses very early in my career was don't push dates back, pull them in.
Yeah,
And if you don't have an answer, just tell people you don't have an answer
yep,
because leaving someone hanging is the worst thing you can do.
100% agree.
I got two quick last questions.
Okay.
If that's you good for time?
Yeah, 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 go.
Okay, so the whole point of this podcast, the whole point of this interview series is really just to, go in blind, talk to people within the industry, try to find the authenticity, have some funny stories, some anecdotes, but also take some information out for entrepreneurs, take some information out for artists, because that's what we're here for, right? People within the industry. So, two last ones, one for me and entrepreneurs, one for musicians. Was there a point at all in your career where you found that you were driven by success or chasing success and then that changed? Or do you think that your motivations were always strictly just about creating? Talk to me a bit about that part of your career so far.
It's funny when I have people ask me these sorts of questions or talk, like, wow, what a career you've had, and da da da. When you're in the middle of it, it never feels that way. Like, it never feels to me when I'm in it that those sorts of questions or thoughts never come up in my brain. I'm so busy, and every day I'm just excited to try to push some idea forward that I'm not really looking much beyond that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, um, and like We're in the middle of doing a deal right now with a pretty famous video game company about a very famous video game where they want to put out some music. They want to put out some vinyl and they want to. So they approached us and said, "Hey, we like what you do. We like the way you do it." And so, like, that's just been my obsession the last 48 hours. I'm trying to close this deal. It's all that's on my mind. Um, I'm not sitting there thinking, like, oh, this is kind of groundbreaking, or oh, this might be something people look at and say, wow, how did you? It's never like that for me. I just find myself so in the middle of stuff. I'm very reactive. Like if you ask my wife, like, what do you think the key to his success has been? I think she would say that I have an ability to see opportunities where maybe other people don't see them. Like I'll see
Mhm.
something and go, "Oh shit, I can see how this could lead from A to B to C to D," and then start to just put it into effect. And I think the other key to my success, if I'm really honest about it, is I've got brutal OCD. I have really bad obsessive compulsive disorder, and I think that also explains, for example, why I can't leave my office unless I've responded to every single email. I'm sort of obsessive about it. I get obsessive about things. And if there's two or three things I'm working on simultaneously and I'm obsessive about them all, I won't sleep. Like, I will literally not sleep or I'll sleep a few hours a night. Like, I think the last two
Yeah.
weeks I've probably averaged 3 or 4 hours a night. I'm not proud of that. I don't think that's healthy, but it's just the way I work. It's just the way my brain is. Well, when I start to sort of obsess about a certain project, for example, that's all everything else I have blinders on. It's all I think about. It's all I eat, sleep, and drink whatever I'm obsessing about. So
Mhm.
probably not the healthiest thing, but nonetheless, I think it's a big part of my success is that I am very, very obsessive and very, very driven. And my mind just seems to work a little bit differently than the average person's mind. And I'm not saying that it works better or worse. I'm just saying that I'll see something in a set of facts that maybe other people wouldn't see. And
Mhm.
it leads me to go, "Oh man, like even 604 because like 604 wasn't Chad and I weren't we didn't have this idea of, hey, let's start a record label. It was nothing like that. Chad used to produce bands, and then I was his lawyer, so I would paper. He'd be like, "Hey, buddy, I'm working with this band. Can you do up some quick paper? Like, if they get signed, I get X, Y, and Z, or I get the first right to make the record, or whatever." And one of the bands that he did these demos with was a band called Shock the Day. And as usual, nothing ever happened. I mean, the only thing that for the first few years, the only things that Chad and I worked on together that worked were Nickelback. We had all these other
Mhm.
bands we worked with, and nothing ever happened. And he called me one night and said, "Hey, man, remember that band Shock the Day?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, they changed their name to Default, and they got a new singer, and he's real good looking, and they're playing tonight at Studebaker's. You want to go?" I said, "Yeah." So we went, and that's Dallas Smith. Dallas Smith's first, literally his first time he ever publicly performed, and we were there, and we loved them, absolutely loved them. Dallas was so scared of performing, he would face away from the audience all night. But the music was good, and we sort of said, "We like you guys. We want to do something with you." We did a deal with them, not a record deal. We didn't have a record company. We just did an agreement that we were going to make some songs, shop them. If we got them a deal, we would get, I can't remember, 25% of their advance or something. And that was a year-long project. We made a few songs, we shopped them, and we got them a deal. And
Nice.
so that got my brain going. Oh man, if we had structured that a little bit differently, we would have made more money. And da da da. Fast forward a year later, and we had met Tyler Connolly from Theory of a Dead Man at a party, a house party, and he gave us cassettes. If I remember correctly, he said, "I heard you guys were going to be here, so that's why I came." And he had cassettes for both of us, and we both listened, and we liked them. And Chad was like, I said, "What'd you think of that Theory of a Dead Man cassette?" He said, "I loved it. What'd you think?" I said, "Yeah, I love it too." He's like, "We should do like we did with Default," and I was like, "No, no, 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 no. This time we're going to do it different." I incorporated the company that became 604, but even then it wasn't really supposed to be a record company. I just want to sign a production deal so that if we were successful in shopping them, we'd get points on four albums instead of one album. So with me, it's always like that. Like my brain, I'll have an experience, and right away my brain goes to next time this happens, And even a record company itself was a fluke. Like I was in LA shopping these Theory of a Dead Man demos, and a guy from Atlantic Records called me and said, "Hey man," and Nickelback hadn't even blown up yet. This is before How You Remind Me. He was like, "Hey man, just so I'm clear, are you shopping Theory of a Dead Man or are you shopping your label?" Well, I had never really thought about it like that. And so I responded, I reacted, you know, it was like slow motion. Label. And I remember calling Chad, say, "Hey man, I think I just started a bidding war on our label." And Chad's response, "What label?" So forget it. The paper we signed with Theory. Well, within a month, we were on a plane to New York, meeting with Clive Davis, L.A. Reid, Leor Cohen regarding our non-existent label. So I was able to sort of turn a lot of nothing into a big label deal.
That's amazing. I really appreciate all these stories and how candid you're being. You're kind of answering more questions at the same time, in the sense that, true entrepreneurs, from what I understand, from what I'm living, think less and do more. And then you learn by making those mistakes and pivoting and then and reassessing and continuing to go and grow, so to speak. What about early in the career before there's financial success and you're like, I don't know how I'm paying my mortgage, but I know I need to do this. How do you keep going? How do you
Well,
focus
I
when you're
kept
doing
being a
that?
lawyer. I mean, I was doing criminal and immigration law right until I hit that safety zone where it's like, okay, I feel safe now that I can transition to an entertainment lawyer. And then with
There.
the record company, I waited until I really felt like we were in a safe spot before I sort of gave up my law practice. I still have three clients, but they're the same three clients I had 15 years ago. I gave everything else up, um, and it was scary. And I remember my wife in particular was like, "Are you nuts?" We have this great thriving law practice. Why would you want to give that up? But the truth is, as I told her at the time, because I'm not happy because I think I'd
Yeah.
be much happier doing this. And if I'm happier, I have a feeling I'm going to be more successful. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Good for you. Good for you for following your passion. Last one for the artists. Speaking of happiness, so we are young, 2.5 years in. I'm giving with my team advice to these artists as best we can to navigate the pitfalls of the industry, or navigate the industry so they don't go into these pitfalls. Right? Avoid the issues and errors that we've seen so many other artists make. Stay true to yourself. Focus on developing the launch pad. Everyone's always like, "Oh, let's blast off." You're not even in the rocket ship. We need to build the launch pad. And before you even build the launch pad, we need to like actually till the soil and get the ground ready for the concrete. So that's what we're doing, foundational work
Yep.
to help them get higher faster.
Yep.
So many of them say, okay, like you guys do everything, we're, branding, socials, PR, marketing, you name it, like we're mental health, everything. It seems to be consistent that a lot of people keep asking about booking and management. Like, I need to get out there and play. I need shows. I need someone to represent me. Is that accurate? What's your position? Like, how important is a booking agent or management, especially now with all the tools that artists have available to them, without having to sign everything away?
It's less important than it used to be. And I think it's always an issue of timing. And that part hasn't changed. And by that, I mean, um, you know when you really need a manager. And if nothing really is going on, you probably don't need a manager. I think the management's scary, man. Like it's probably the scariest relationship there is in the business because if you think about it, like if you sign a record deal, you don't know you're going to be successful, but if nothing else, you know that I was looking for a CD. I had a CD sitting on my desk. I don't have it now, but you know, if nothing else, it's going to lead to a CD being made.
Hmm.
I'm using that figuratively. A record, like if nothing
Yeah.
else, you're going to be able to make a record, put it out. That doesn't mean you're going to succeed, but hey, at least you get that. It's tangible. Usually, you get an advance up front. That's tangible. You sign a publishing agreement, you get an advance. That's tangible. But what do you get when you sign a management deal? You get somebody's promise to do their best for you. That's it. You get
Hmm.
somebody's promise to do their best for you. Now, that's something. That's not nothing. And if you are with a great manager, that can be the best thing, the best move you ever make. But boy, if it's not a good manager or it's not a good relationship, it can be the worst move you ever made. And then if you try to get out of the deal and you're stuck in some contract, it can be an absolute nightmare. So I think, if you meet somebody who you really think is the person, I want this person to be my manager. He or she gets me. I feel when they talk that it makes sense. When they explain their vision of where this could go, it resonates with me. Okay, then
Hmm.
make the move because it is hard to find a good manager. You find someone at any point in your career that you have no doubt about, make the move. But I don't think you need a manager necessarily to succeed. I've worked with too many bands who didn't have them. And now, even more so, because so many bands first find their audience online without any management at all. Something explodes on TikTok, something explodes on YouTube, something explodes on Spotify. And the further along in your career you are, the less harsh the terms are going to be of any deal you do. If they need you at least as much as you need them, your bargaining power is much, much, much better. So I think it's a mistake to just grab onto the first manager who shows some interest unless you really have reason to believe that person gets you, is going to actually do tangible things that are going to help you. And same with a booking agent. At least with a booking agent, it's usually less of a committed relationship. And all I mean by that is if things aren't working, you could just leave. Management's usually more complicated to extricate yourself from a bad situation. Agency, it's like, look, I don't think it's working out. Let's shake hands. And that usually happens. But I'll say the same thing. You find the right agent at any point in your career, jump on it because it can make such a difference. I mentioned Ralph James earlier. He's Nickelback's agent. He's Marianas Trench's agent. Awesome agent who is absolutely was instrumental in the success of both of those bands because he got it from a very early date and believed in them and worked his ass off for them. But you know, so yeah, are those both like important relationships that can really help your career? Absolutely. But particularly in the case of management, it can also be a relationship that destroys your career. You really got to be careful. You really got to be sure. Whereas with an agent, it's easier to just take a chance because if it doesn't work out, it's one phone call. Hey man, I don't think this is working out. Okay.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck. That's it.
Uh, Jonathan, this has been such an awesome chat.